Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lori Moore Merrill, formerly of the IAFF, just recently retiring in April. It's a pleasure to get to be back with you today. I am serving now as the president of the new International Public Safety Data Institute, and it's always exciting for me, even in the short duration that I've been gone, to get to come back. It feels like coming home to be with you. This afternoon, I'm going to serve as your moderator for this session on active shooter, are you prepared? Many of you, like me, may remember the first time you made a shooting, a stabbing in your career. What we are talking about now and in our society today is orders of magnitude different than a single shooting or a single stabbing. I want to welcome our web audience as well. So in addition to those in the room, we do have a live webcast of this session. So we welcome them joining us this afternoon. In fact, if you wanted to text anyone back home, you could do that now. Have them go to the IFF website or Facebook page, and they can join in this session as well. So please feel free to do that if you wish. We're going to go ahead and get started with our slides this afternoon. Jumping right into NFPA 3000 and talking just a little bit about the concepts in the standard. I do serve as the IAFF's principal on NFPA 3000 Technical Committee, as I had mentioned in a session earlier. Occurs. And so I want you to know that as we look into these concepts, today our panelists are going to be sharing with you their perspectives in each of these four different areas. So looking at whole community, you'll hear that throughout the presentations, how important it is that everyone is involved, that it's not just fire, it's not just law enforcement, it's not just the hospitals, it's not just the victim's assistance, it's everybody in coordination, and that becomes very important as we move throughout the segment. It's also about unified command. In the immediacy of a response, it's about knowing who's coming. Who can you depend on? Who have you prepared with to respond? And so our first two speakers are really going to be focusing on their perspectives, but also coming together and understanding the importance of this unified command and this integrated response. And as I mentioned this morning, I'll say it again, regardless of the venue in which these types of events occur, whether it is in a park area, a church, a school, a mall, you can think within your community where that might be, but always thinking ahead to include someone from the representative from the area, from the venue, even if it's in the moment. Think ahead to make sure that you bring them into the loop. So let's go ahead and get started then with our first of the four speakers today. I'm going to be introducing you, once again, many of you have seen him before, to Fire Chief Greg Castle. Chief Castle has been with Clark County Fire Department since 1989. Prior to his appointment as the position of fire chief in 2015, he served as a firefighter paramedic, a fire engineer, a captain, and a battalion chief. Chief Castle has extensive background in USAR, also technical rescue operations, and training program development. He's lectured nationally more than 125 times, unfortunately, on this subject matter, and on several topics related to command and control and high-rise fire operations as well, most recently on the benefits of forming relationships with local law enforcement agencies. So please welcome Chief Greg Castle.
I'm starting my timer because she's very strict with her time. So this will be a little bit of a reiteration for those of you who saw this morning's general presentation on the Route 91 Harvest Festival shooting in Las Vegas on October 1st of 2017. And this next slide is a sound that I never thought I'd hear in my world, and I hope you never hear in yours. If you could advance that, please, or start that. This is taken from an Uber. It's an Uber video driving out of the Mandalay Bay. And the FBI took the video and condensed the 10 minutes of shooting down to about a 2.5-minute clip. But what is amazing is I've seen videos, security cameras from many, many different angles, because we have a wonderful relationship with our law enforcement and our FBI, is watching the response of the people on the ground. Absolutely nobody has a clue what's going on. The pedestrians are still walking down the street. Unless you're in the venue where people are starting to drop, you really don't have a clue what's going on. Traffic's unaffected, and a lot of bad things are going on. So you can go ahead and stop that. So a brief outlook, this three-night country concert was on its last night, wrapping up on October 1st, about 10 o'clock. Jason Aldean was coming on. He was the closing act for that three-day event. So about 22,000 attendees, plus the back-of-house workers, supporters, the bartenders, all the people selling things and stuff like that, support staff. So there were several thousand more people in the venue when this kicked off. And it was a 17.5-acre venue that we called Las Vegas Village. A lot of things have been held there. The Bourne movie that took place in Vegas, they did a lot of filming there. When we hold big fights in town, the Mayweather-McGregor type fights, they put 16,000 extra bleacher seats out there, sell tickets. It's a very popular spot on the Las Vegas Strip. Reference the layout of the properties at night. The red circle is the Mandalay Bay. The yellow rectangle is the venue site itself. It's about 380 yards or so to center stage from where the shooter was effecting his killing. And then the command post that we were lucky to have next door with the police department and us, we share a driveway, Station 11 and South Central Area Command. We share a driveway that we could set up a unified command. So this guy here, 64-year-old white millionaire, never in a million years would have hit the radar. He'd bought, in a 9-month span, he had bought over 40 assault weapons and 56 accessories like high-capacity magazines and things like that for his weaponry. And he did this unbelievable attack on our people. He had an elevated position. Not only did he have an elevated position, he had a 300-foot hallway. He was the end suite with a double door, and he had a fatal funnel set up for the cops. He had barred the door just outside to the right, which is the fire service access stairs. He had screwed that shut with an L bracket, and he'd placed surveillance cameras through the doors, both looking down the hallway and at the stairwell. He was very well prepared for what he did. And he had 5,000 rounds of ammunition still in the room. So had he decided to stand his ground that night, I don't know what this would have looked like, especially for our police department, who had to assault that room to stop the killing. Fortunately, 16 minutes in, he took care of it for us. This is the effective range of the weapon systems that he had. He had a 223 and 308 range, so the greenish area is a 223, the red is 308. And my IT guys put this together, and it's basically a bird's eye view of what it would look like from his room looking down the concert venue, the Strip, and the surrounding hotels. He had 2 rooms, the end suite, 32134, or 32135, and then the suite next to it, which is 32134. And he got 2 suites. He was the only one in the room, but he had a really good story. He's a very big gambler. He's got 8 relatives coming in, or 9 relatives coming in. They're going to have a family reunion, so he got extra keys. When he would order food, he would order extra food. He must have just flushed it down the toilet because we never had any sign of that food. He would say things like, hey, what do you want in your hamburger? Oh, mustard, okay. He played this game out for days in setting up what he was getting ready to do. If you saw in there was some bullet points there, some markers in there, EMS division, East division, Central, all these different assignments. We walked into the hot zone, right? We say we're never going to go in the hot zone. We took that out of our hostile MCI policy because we have now realized that's not going to be a hard positive every time because you don't know exactly what the threat's going to be. This next video is overlaid with the gunfire, radio traffic from the police department that was in the venue, and security cameras from Mandalay Bay. This video shows from the start of the shooting as people started to flee the concert site. And that's the reality of the confusion that was on the ground that night. Was it a drive-by? We have a shooter at gate 7. That proved to be wrong. We have shots from the stage. That proved to be wrong. We had all these different things, and the cops in the venue are trying to run around and find this person and neutralize him. But that person's way up in the tower, and they saw some gunfire coming from up there. But somebody else said, no, that's just a strobe light up there. It's not. So there was a lot of confusion, and we can't fault them for it because that's what they're seeing. People are running up to the cops going, there's a guy over there with a gun. Well, that guy over there with a gun was an FBI agent who was off duty at the concert and was carrying. So that did take place. There was a lot of confusion, and they did a tremendous job trying to coordinate their response in that event that night. So this is not scientific by any stretch of the imagination, but we talked about the 17.5-acre venue, and these little red dots as the shooting begins represents the flow of people. Again, my IT group put this together for us. And as this thing grew out, it started to spread, and these 22,000+ people now cover an area of more than 3.5 square miles. So we've trained for all this stuff, churches, malls, schools, and stuff like that. We had a shooting at an outdoor 17.5-acre venue that gave us a 3.5 square mile in the dark commercial area MCI. It was very challenging for us. Some of the problems we had was getting in, just getting rigs to the box, right? We always try to go to the box and work in the box. And this radio traffic right here is an example of that. Oh, that cut off. Engine 32's reply was, I now have 6 gunshot victims. I have 1 person 419 in the car. I need Metro units, I need another ambulance, and I need another fire department asset, right? And that was a span of about 2 minutes and 10 seconds. From going from a very quick staging assignment, got in, got an assignment.
I have a total of 6 gunshot wound victims here. I have 1 patient that's been brought up that is 419 in the vehicle. We're going to need Metro to secure.
So about like 2 minutes and 10 seconds. He went from nothing to that. And that was at every single access point going in, because thousands and thousands of people are fleeing down every potential street or avenue or alley, dragging their sometimes dead and sometimes critically wounded friends and family members. So we ended up with, we used more than, we got away from specifics because of the media stuff, but more than 869 injured.
We need 2 additional fire.
It's a very popular audio track. It's popping up. More than 413 people shot, 58 dead. 13 area hospitals saw patients, including Barstow, California. There was 1 guy shot in the leg. Country love, we gotta love these country people, right? Shot in the leg. He's like, all right, I'm probably not gonna get seen in Vegas, they're gonna be busy tonight. His buddy drove him to the store, they bought a 12-pack and they drove back to Barstow. So you gotta love it. He's like, I need a doctor, I'm going back home. So, distraction calls. How many of you, when you go to work and you put your stuff on the rig, you have the opportunity to be the incident commander of whatever takes place that night? How many of you? Raise your hands. Not me anymore. I'm a pencil pusher, but I did it one time. So what you're going to see next in this slide is the radio traffic. We have planned for Mumbai. We have planned for a complex coordinated attack, and this radio traffic really sets forth what our incident commanders had to handle that night. If you could start that.
Division, go ahead.
Hey, Chief, we're getting reports from bystanders that they saw somebody go into an RV directly across the street from where we're at, wearing fatigues and a black duffel bag.
And 6, be advised, we're getting reports on Mandalay Bay.
Can you advance it once more and see if the animations come up?
We currently have another active shooter up there.
Oh, never mind. They weren't on mine, sorry. Okay, if you could back it up and take care of my faux pas there. Sorry about that.
Division, go ahead.
Hey, Chief, we're getting reports from bystanders that they saw somebody go into an RV directly across the street from where we're at, wearing fatigues and a black duffel bag.
And 6, be advised, we're getting reports on Mandalay Bay, the top of Mandalay Bay at the bar. We currently have another active shooter up there.
I have reports that there's an active shooter at New York, and shots heard from Hooters.
We have reports of active shooters now
at Hakkasan and New York, New York. I have not confirmed that.
Also getting reports that shots are being fired at MGM as well. Shots fired MGM. We now have report of an active shooter at the Tropicana, active shooter at the Tropicana.
Command from North Branch, emergency traffic. We have people on the roof of the Tropicana, at least 2 people on the roof of the Tropicana.
Emergency traffic, shots fired in the Tropicana. Shots fired in the Tropicana.
Command from North Branch, we're getting people evacuating out of the Excalibur, reporting that there's a fire in there. Chief Blackburn's receiving reports of shots fired in the Planet Hollywood, and I see strobes going off inside of the Mandalay. Chief Blackburn just came in here. He's reporting shots fired at Caesars now.
Be advised, we are currently receiving reports of an active shooter at McCarran Airport. Repeat, active shooter at McCarran Airport. And be advised, we're getting reports on the 34th floor of Mandalay Bay. There's been an explosion in the 32nd, 33rd, and 34th floor on fire.
Command, we just had a shock pack show up unattended right where EMS branch is set up at Alibaba and Giles. We're relocating from the area.
Command operations. Also, we're getting reports of hostages being held currently at New York, New York.
Emergency traffic, Force Protection 6 is reporting shots fired at the New York, New York.
So every one of those things in their minds was legit. People seeing people shot inside those hotels are saying, I'm shooting, they just shot me outside the door. Start calling in, hey, there's a shooter at MGM, there's a shooter at Caesars. I'm being held hostage outside this room. I know that there are bad people. They're going to kill me. They're holding me hostage, and me and my shot friends. But every one of those things that happened over the course of a 2-hour time frame had to be vetted with fire department and police department joint responses. And it took a tremendous amount of resources. I've already thanked my partners from City Las Vegas, Henderson, and North Vegas for their cooperation and participation at night, because we had to put a lot of people to work in a lot of ways that we hadn't really planned on before. Oops. Command was established. Sitting isn't matching up. Command was established, lasted about 9 hours and 27 minutes. Then we went into Unified Command, and I've actually got a picture of it for training purposes. It says Unified Command, Las Vegas Metro, Clark County Fire, FBI, with a box drawn around it. How many people have seen that before? Not many. It took us a long time to get there, and hundreds of thousands of dollars. But we planned for our regular targets, as I mentioned, schools, churches, theaters, and malls. We never deployed more than 3 RTFs in any of our trainings or any of our plans, when on this particular night we deployed 19 RTFs to cover this event. And they did everything from not only going in the venue, but going in and clearing the rooms at the Mandalay Bay, which is 3,300 rooms alone, and Luxor, New York, New York, Tropicana, Hooters, and MGM. We're talking thousands and thousands and thousands of rooms that our people got their foot in the door that night with cops just to make sure nothing else was going on. They didn't get done until 6 o'clock in the morning. So our changes going forward, I mentioned this morning, Hospital Area Command. Your MCI in the urban setting will move, without a doubt, and you having anything to do about it, will move from point A to the closest hospital. And it may not be a trauma center, because what do the visitors, what do people do? Hospital. What's the closest hospital comes up? It's the little community hospital with 10 beds around the corner, not the level 1 trauma center that's 2 extra miles down the road. And all of a sudden, all these people get to those hospitals. So we built a plan to support that. We had to change our hospital MCI policy in a couple areas. We always had to have a rated captain in charge of a moving RTF. Well, that night, some captains got moved into command support positions, which left their crew captainless, so we bumped up people on the acting list or the captain's list and gave them a little battlefield promotion that night. So we had to make that change. We also had to change the hot zone terminology. We don't use operations a ton. We're very branch heavy, even in our high-rise firefighting, until we get 5 branches that are fully functioning and need overhead and support, then we'll go to operations. We did use operations that night, and that's something we need to get better at as a valley. We need to involve our EMS partners and our comm centers in our training, and we need to bolster our peer support teams and other support resources in the valley. Now, a lot of those came out of the woodwork. I was mentioning it earlier. Yoga, I would have pretty much lost my entire bank account on a bet if somebody told me that goat yoga existed. Never heard of it? It does. Why you would want a little goat to jump on your back while you're stretching yourself, I don't get it. Faith-based groups, the unions support, the IAFF support. A lot of things came out of the woodwork because we were completely overwhelmed. We had 161 fire personnel combined at that event that night, and all of a sudden we had to deal with them, plus 25 or 30 of our people that were at the concert and watched people get killed right in front of them. So we had a lot of work to do. So that's it. Oh, I think I'm on time. So thank you for your time here, and we'll be available for questions, obviously.
That goes beyond orders of magnitude, right? Our next speaker is Chief Rick Smith. He has become a friend. He serves with us on the NFPA 3000 committee as well. Chief Smith is a retired chief of police in Wakefield, Massachusetts, after a 21-year career. He's a graduate of the 176th session of the FBI National Academy at Quantico, Virginia. Chief Smith is also a past president of the FBI National Academy Associates of New England. He is a graduate of the National Fire Academy in Emmitsburg, Maryland, as well. Chief Smith also served in Massachusetts Chiefs of Police, Police Executive Committee, and is a former member of the IACP, the International Association of Chiefs of Police Community Policing Committee. Please join me in welcoming our friend, Chief Rick Smith.
Thank you, everybody. And I want to, especially before I begin, I want to thank my mother for writing that, and for Laurie for reading it. Are there any other law enforcement in the room here? Oh boy. Anybody from New England in the room here? Okay, so a couple of you will understand what I'm going to say. In New England, I'm from the Boston area. I live right outside of Boston. There's 25 letters in the alphabet. There's no R, so bear with me. I've had the great honor of serving in this business, as Laurie said, as a chief of police for 21 years, for 46 in the business. Okay, so I started very young. I started at 12. But with my role with the IACP, I was asked to join the technical committee for the NFPA 3000 program, and that's what I'm going to talk to you a little bit about today. But I also want to run some numbers by you, because I think it's very important. As Laurie said, she stole a few of my slides earlier, about what we're talking about, how we work as a community, and I think the chief articulated very well is how law enforcement, the community, and everybody has to work together. I am not immune to this also. In 2000, the town of Wakefield experienced one of the larger, at the time, mass shootings where 7 employees were killed in a factory. The day after Christmas, it was 4 degrees out, so we all know how that factors in. So I'm no stranger to what is going on, as well as my involvement here today. There was a need for a new standard, and how we got here is a long and twisted road that took actually only 1 year to get where we are. The standard was developed after the number of hostile events and active shooters that were happening all around the United States. We're looking, as a community, police, fire, EMS, everybody was looking for ways to better protect ourselves and our communities. And as a result of that, we came up with the NFPA 3000. After the Orlando shooting down at the Pulse nightclub, the chief in Orange County, Florida, came out and said, something has to be done. We have to work together. And what happened within a year, the NFPA put together a technical committee, and we came out with a standard that has been subject to review and eventually has become a guide for not only law enforcement, fire, public safety, and mass, and our communities. A couple of numbers here right off the top. 66% of the attacks are over before law enforcement arrives. They average about 12 minutes, the event from start to finish before the shooting stops. 98% of them involve a single attacker, and the majority of the shooters eventually commit suicide, which obviously neutralizes a hazard for incoming law enforcement and fire service personnel. I'm going to run a quick video here that is going to demonstrate to us and to everybody in this room how working together is so important and our training together. And this was developed out in Cambridge, Massachusetts, by the member agencies that are shown on your screen. So if you just want to take a second and look at this Urban Shield video that we put together.
really gotta go, you're gonna be late.
Denise, so these are the most up-to-date plans that we have?
That's all we have.
We're gonna have to work on it. This is not gonna be good enough.
Okay, all right, well, get out of here. Good morning, Commissioner's Office. Can I help you?
I got no idea, but we gotta go. No! Our computer!
911, this line's recorded. What's the exact location of your emergency?
There's a shooter in the Agassi house. I'm hiding here.
Hello? Are you there?
Get in behind me. Okay. I check that door on the right. Go.
We interrupt your regularly scheduled.
I'm going to cut that short a little bit because it can go on. It goes on. That's an Urban Shield video that we put together to talk about how up in the greater Boston area, for those in the greater Boston area, recognize Harvard University and the MBTA transit line. But what the issue is here is we're talking about multiple explosions and how multiple events and how we all have to work together. That was about 3 minutes. That pretty much tells you how quickly these things unfold. In 3 minutes, usually they're over with by the time we get there. So that's a great gauge on how quickly things happen. And if you put yourself in that position and you think about you're responding, you get the alarm, you get the 911 call, whatever it may be, how fast things are going to happen, and how quickly everybody's lives are going to change. So the question is your community prepared? And I hope everybody in this room will take a lesson from today and from the conference here. Is your community prepared, and who's involved in that preparation? Of course, I want to put law enforcement up there first, because I'm the only cop in the room. You notice my back's to the wall. Law enforcement. Obviously, in many communities, law enforcement is a PSAP and takes the 911 call, the tactical end of that. The days of where it's a law enforcement event and a firefighter stood by, or if it's a fire event and a law enforcement stood by, those days are gone. Fire services, however you describe that in your jurisdiction. When you're talking about community preparedness, which is all part of the NFPA 3000, these are the items that we should be talking about. Some things that we don't think about a lot. EMS and fire, usually, especially in my world, are connected. In many parts of the country, they're separate. Bring them to the table. Politicians and community leaders, if they're not in your plans, then you have failed. You will fail. One, you need money. Two, you need them on board because they change very quickly. As they always said, and I think the chief will agree with me, politicians come and go. The chief or the deputy chief are always going to be there. So you want to keep that in mind. You need your school leadership. You need your school staff, right down to the guidance counselors, to school resource officers, to the fire safety personnel that are in your schools. Your mental health counselors, we'll probably talk a little bit later on about mental health and how important that is. Your faith-based community. We're going to talk a little bit about what do we do after the fact, when does that start and when does it end? And you really need to bring your faith-based community as a leader in your community into the fold. Social service agencies, because we talk a lot about mental illness and issues that follow that. Your federal partners, the FBI plays a huge role in what we all do. Talking earlier with Chief Kessel about what happened in Vegas and the number of agents that were deployed into the area from and after. It was an incredible assistance, as well as the evidence piece that goes on from and after the event. You need the FBI, ATF, DOJ, DEA, all of those acronyms that represent federal agencies, they should be in part of your planning. And don't forget your National Guard units and your military units. Most important to have them on board for their technical expertise. And the most important piece is the after action. Completion of the after action is way beyond the realm of anybody's belief, because we all learn from that, we're all planning off of that, and we're all using that as a working document. So how do you prepare? How do you get this going when you bring all these agencies in? From the law enforcement perspective, and I think from the fire side of the house, you want to start this today. You want to start it in your basic recruit training programs. When your personnel go off to their training academy, that's where it has to start. That curriculum has to be adjusted. It also has to be followed up in your in-service training protocols. It should be all part of your manuals and your policy development and your training. In addition to that, we should all be practicing our active shooter and our ASHRAE events. I'm sure we all do that, but we just can't do the tactical side of it. It's a little bit more than rescue task forces and neutralizing the suspect. It's planning, looking forward, looking backward, and seeing exactly what is going on out there. And this is what the NFPA talks about. You have to involve in your preparation your business community. They know their buildings better than anybody, whether it's a Mandalay hotel, or it's a small coffee shop, or it's a school, or it's a subway system, whatever it may be. Bring that business community into your planning. Obviously, your concerts, your large events, purveyors. I don't want to get into the Red Sox or the Patriots, but you know, we can talk about that offline. And I don't want to talk about the Red Sox after what's been going on up there, but incident management, you have to bring them to the table. And last but not least, and I've said it before, you have to bring the military engagement on board. They have to be part of your planning. I talked a little bit about reuniting. When do you start to reunite? When do you bring people together? When does it start? Does it start as soon as the 911 call comes in? Does it start at the conclusion of the tactical ops side of the house? Does it start after the RTF? Does it start after the injured have been removed and the deceased taken care of and tended to? Does it start after the evidence collection piece? Or when does it really start once the scene is secured? I'm going to talk about that in a couple of minutes. A little bit about active shooter incidents from FBI numbers, just so you'll get this as 2018. We'll run through and then we'll get into 2018. Active shooter incidents across this country in the United States of America from 2000 to 2017 has been 250 incidents with 2,200 casualties. In 2016 and 17 alone, there were 50 incidents with 943 casualties. Locations, everybody thinks in their own mind because of their own community what the locations are, but the numbers here are real. They happen in places of commerce 43% of the time, 22% of the time in educational environment, in an open space 13% of the time, government is 11% of the time, and in residences are 5% of the time, and not on the slide is religious institutions, which are 2% of the time. In 2000, let me back up here a little bit. No, maybe we won't. Okay. Active shooter events. This map has changed as of this morning. I got a report from the FBI this morning. It's changed a little bit. But from 2016 to 2017, if you look at the map, the largest states, obviously, because of population, have had the largest number of events, being California, Texas, and Florida. But if you look at that map, kind of hold it in your mind as we move forward here, because what we're talking about in 2018 incidents, we've had 27, in 2018, we had 27 active shooter incidents in 18 states, resulting in casualties, 213 casualties, 85 killed, and 27 wounded. In 2018, 16 of those were in areas of commerce, 5 were in educational environments, 2 were in open space, 1 was in a government installation. So keep in mind as we go forward the hazards that could potentially be in the communities that you serve. Everybody seems to think that they happen only in schools. That's actually not true. The data shows, the FBI data shows that. And the perception is that these are big city problems. They're actually not big city problems. Many of these events happen in smaller communities, although we do have the Las Vegas, we do have the El Paso, and we've had horrific events, but we think about the Garlic Festival that we had in California just 2 or 3 weeks ago. There's smaller communities, although you're going to see them happening in places more often than not in places like Texas, California, and Florida. So people say, what does the NFPA 3000 do? Let's talk about what the NFPA 3000 does. First of all, it provides resources for your community leaders. In addition to that, it offers tools to help to plan, respond, and what I think the most important is the recover piece. What it does not do, it does not list prevention tips, and it does not mandate or detail local tactics. We have to keep in mind that the NFPA 3000 document, as we know it, is a guide. I will tell you that from the law enforcement side of the house, it was very difficult to get that through because of our protocols, to get people to understand that it's just a guide and it's here to help us. There are 4 main, you've seen the slide earlier today, there are 4 main concepts. And we're going to talk a little bit about the 4 main concepts, and we're going to hit on them very quickly. There's unified command, there's integrated response, there's a planned recovery, and then there's the whole community. I want to show you a quick video here of, well, first of all, this slide tells us about the whole community, about unified command, integrated response, and the bottom line is everybody has a role in this. You have a short clip that's going to follow here, and it's going to articulate to you exactly what we mean by everybody having a role. This is an FBI video. I'm sure many of you have seen it, but just pay attention to what's going on here in the beginning.
Dirt. Worse than dirt. Like, I don't even exist anymore. And when you do notice me, it's only to treat me like shit in front of your teammates and the rest of the school. You could have any girl you want, but no. You have to pick Stacy, the only girl I've ever loved. How am I gonna compete against a football star? You'll find out. How am I gonna compete against a football star? You'll find out.
So, what else do we know about him?
Well, he told one of my players last week that he bought a new gun.
But he's been hunting since he was a kid.
Well, if he's a hunter, that's not a change in conduct. But it does tell us he has access to guns. What we're looking for now are behavioral clues that show change.
Randy quit the Spanish club last week.
Have you spoken with the teacher in charge of that?
I don't care about the Spanish club. It's obvious he's about to snap.
We respond to situations like this all the time, and what we see is kids like this don't just snap. They move through a series of behaviors on a trajectory towards violence.
Did you just not see me here at all? You were going the wrong way in the first place.
Okay, calm down. I need license and insurance from both of you.
Oh, my husband is gonna freak.
Yeah, well, so's my mom, so thanks for that.
Hey, I'm on my way to my last final
Great. We'll be there in 30 minutes. Will you be ready to go when you're done with your test?
I still have a little packing to do.
Sarah!
Mom, I didn't have time to pack last night. I had to study. This is a really tough class.
Sarah, you know we have to be at the party by 3, and there might be snow coming.
Mom, I gotta go. I'm running late. I'll see you soon. I love you. Bye.
Wait, what were we studying late last night, girlfriend? Mixology?
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Sorry.
Hey,
That's how it starts. A couple of things I want to bring out. If you notice in the beginning of the video, everybody's sitting around. The people that were involved in that communication, there was the coach, there was the teacher, there was the guidance counselor, the FBI. Of course, you had a couple of FBI agents hanging around your high school. But you know, being a local cop, I can say that about the FBI. But the bottom line is you have to plan. You have to plan. You have to bring everybody in. And this is an important role in the schools. The other thing, I don't know if you noticed, the shooter himself, who was the shooter? A white male, somewhere between 19 and 35 years old. Las Vegas was a little different. But those are the numbers that we're dealing with every day. Those are the people that we see every day that are involved. So bear in mind, in the majority of these cases, it's a white male that's filled with anger. There are some psychological issues that are going on, and it takes a whole community to figure those out. It may take a parent, it may take a guidance counselor, it may take a friend, a spurned boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever it may be. So when you plan going forward, you should be thinking about that and not be afraid to engage your local partners. Unified command concept, again, the NFPA, we talked about this, the fire, EMS, and law enforcement, that was always unified command. That's changed, ladies and gentlemen. And of course, we all know that the fourth piece now is the local representation. And that could be anybody in your local and should be everybody from the previous slide. We also talked about integrated response. And what exactly does that mean? Bringing law enforcement and fire service together. The law enforcement, we talked about competencies, knowledge based on task and competencies, federal, state, and local requirements, and then a threat-based medical care. On the fire side, we talked about tasks by zones. This is all spelled out in the standard. The integration with law enforcement responders, as well as competencies, shooters, vehicle IEDs, and fires. It's all about shared knowledge. One of the biggest pieces that came up in the standard as we worked through it was the personal protection equipment requirements. In law enforcement, we all, in today's world, we wear body armor. I'm pretty sure almost every law enforcement officer in the country wears body armor. Fire service, obviously you don't. Police always have an identifiable garment. We have means of communication. Some are good, some are bad. But when we bring the fire together, on the fire joins with law enforcement, I should say, now we're talking about ballistic wear, body armor. We're talking about ballistic helmets and communications and identifiable garments. This is one of the pieces that we talked about at length with the NFPA 3000 Technical Committee. And at what level is the protective equipment that you should be wearing or you should be buying and providing for your staff? What came out of it was a recommendation by the National Institute of Justice for a level 3A at a minimum, ballistic body armor. So the other thing too is make sure that your staff should have identifiable garments, because as we all know, we don't know who is who in a situation like that. And usually, with the chaos that goes on, it's important that the key players are identifiable. Planned recovery. When should the recovery process start? And when it comes to an active shooter or hostile event? We learned a lesson at Sandy Hook in Connecticut. I'm sure everybody has their own idea on when the recovery process should start. Some people say as soon as the incident begins, as soon as the incident wraps up, if it ever wraps up. 24 hours after the incident, the actual answer is today. we should be planning for the recovery piece from this point forward. And what we identified in a technical committee was not only does it start today, it goes on forever. From the law enforcement parlance, when you're a victim for the rest of your life. It's a life sentence. So the rehab and the recovery piece that we talk of has to start today and continue on forever. And how do you manage that? I can tell you right now that at Sandy Hook in Connecticut, they received over 1 million teddy bears. What do you do with 1 million teddy bears? I'll tell you what they did with them down there was they had a bonfire and they burned them all. And then they took the ashes and turned the ashes into a memorial. So that piece of recovery that was intended for the young victims that passed away there, that were murdered there, ended up being memorialized in a monument to the young people. So you have to think about stuff like this. And this is where it's going to take you. And this is why we talk so much about planned recovery in development of the standard. Some of the chapters, and this is the roadmap, you will become familiar with. Planning, we talk about asset development, risk assessment, planning coordination, resource management, incident management. And then we moved into the respond piece, especially in the law enforcement side, but I know the fire service is probably does a much better job than law enforcement. But we talked about how to manage EMS responders, how to provide professional personal protection equipment, communication center equipment and support. The chief mentioned that earlier. And then the recover piece, the continuity of the operation, the hospital preparedness and the response, the out-of-hospital incidents, 3 square miles in Las Vegas that they had to worry about and how to manage. And then chapter 20 is a large chapter on the whole recovery piece. We talked about the phases of recovery. There's really 3 phases of recovery. The immediate recovery, those are the memorials. Those are the things that CNN captures that you see 24 hours a day after an event. You see the candles, you see the teddy bears, you see the candy, you see the religious memorials. Those are immediate, and those are going to go away because we have to get back to life. The next piece is the early recovery. In Vegas, uncalled for, but 12 or 13 golden retriever dogs showed up as comfort dogs to help. What do you do with that? How do you manage that? How do you keep them and utilize them and not let the donor feel that they're more of a pain than anything else? You have to plan for this type of stuff. And lastly, the continued recovery piece. NFPA 3000 talks about that. How do we continue it? In Orlando, it was the One Orlando Fund. In the Boston Marathon, it was the Boston Fund. Still going on. More phases of recovery. This slide just shows over the years where comfort dogs and canines have been dispatched around the country to all of the different events. And it talks about the value of them. That slide gives you an idea of exactly what the recovery piece can mean in different assets. The other piece of the recovery piece is your personnel. The most important piece is the health and well-being of your personnel. I can tell you from personal experience that the agency that I work for, and agencies that I'm very familiar with have suffered personnel suicides because of the PTSD that happens after these events. And that goes forward. The most recent one I had was 15 years after an event. So we have to keep in mind the health and well-being of our personnel. So the NFPA 3000 is a call to action. It talks about planning, preparing, and implementing. You can go online and you can learn a little bit about the NFPA 3000, how to get involved. And then the next step is to identify and implement the components that are in there. Your agency should be doing that. And of course, step 3 is, I have to put the plug in here, you go to the website and access all the resources, information, and knowledge that are out there. You can do it, your personnel can do it online. There's opportunities for that. Not only online are the facts and figures and everything that you need, but there's also stories, real-life case studies, and expert insight. I'm going to wrap up now. I'm sure I've gone over my time, but there's one thing, that's me. There's one thing I want to share with you. It's all about planning, and I'm proud to say that when the Boston Marathon explosion happened, the city of Boston and the surrounding agencies had worked very hard. We do it every year. We plan for it every year. It's a regional approach. It involves not only local police, it involves the fire service from the general area, it involves EMS from the general area, it involves the Mass State Police, National Guard, and everybody. We're very proud of what happened in Boston. I should say, let me back up a little bit. We're very proud of how we managed that event in Boston, and I think Boston was used as a baseline on how to manage large events like this, international events, and what do you do, how do you get people talking to each other. I'm going to play a very short clip on the success of the Boston Marathon and how communication paid off. And if you listen to the radio communication that's in this quick clip, you'll see how calm, planning, practice made perfect and reduced some of the horror that we all witnessed on the day of the Boston Marathon. So if you can just bear with me for 1 second, I'll cut it short, I won't go too long with it, but I do think that it's important that you hear this.
The reason for that is runners have to qualify for this marathon. The lion's share of them do it, and that's the only marathon on the world in the Olympic marathon that is the case.
Zone 1, the UCC, what was that on Boylston?
833, something just exploded at the finish line.
Two separate devices. All units being advised, worry about search devices.
UCC, did I hear that correctly?
Yeah, see it? Confirming. Two devices just went off at Boylston and Exeter. All units, extreme caution.
All units be advised, the explosive device. Everyone use caution, please.
We're just in Boston.
We've had an attack.
The tactical. What's that, please? Logistics. We just had an explosive device go off by the Copley Library. Please have all the units hold their positions till called. We make an evaluation. All right? Affirm that, please.
All units hold your positions. All units hold your positions until we got confirmation on the injuries. All units hold your positions.
In essence of time, I'll cut that off, but bear in mind there were two explosions that day. One was a half a block further west that was going on at the same time. So this is a perfect example of how planning, working together, and making sure that your plans are executed, provided, and save lives that day. So having said that, thank you very much. Thanks for listening to a cop for the last 13 minutes, and thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Chief Smith. We're going to move on now to the medical phase. Let's talk a little bit about not only the care in the street, but receiving hospitals. They're also players in this arena, as we had noted from the very beginning. So let's move to that segment now. We were supposed to have Dr. Richard Kamen with us today. Unfortunately, the storms in the Connecticut area stopped his plane from getting here. So we have another member of the NFPA 3000 committee who happens to be here presenting with me later this afternoon. So we sort of just plugged Captain John Delaney right in, and so he's ready to do this. So let me introduce to you Captain John Delaney of the Arlington County Fire Department. John, we've worked together for many, many years in this arena, dealing with active shooter, starting to look at rescue task forces, and I have to say that he is one of the lead advocates for even forming up the rescue task forces. Where the concept came from really was out of Arlington County, Virginia. John leads the high threat response program for Arlington County Fire. He also manages all of the weapons of mass destruction team for the DC metro area. He's also a graduate of the Post-Naval Graduate School and a dear, dear friend. So please welcome Captain John Delaney.
Thanks. It's good to be here. It's nice to see that a 24-year EMT is substituting for an MD. Talk about a heavy lift. And I found out about it late last night. Anyways, I wanted to start off by just giving some praise to Lori. I've known Lori for a dozen or so years, and she recently retired after 26 years with the IAFF. There has been no one that I've come across that has done more for the firefighters and the first responder community throughout the country. And she's still involved. If you've been to her in-force class, she's looking at compiling data and information that will ultimately benefit us, because we do a shitty job of collecting information. And so I want us to give it up to Lori for all the hard work she's done over the years. So. Yep. Okay. This is not my slides, is it? Huh?
Now it is.
There we go. Okay. So we're going to talk about two things here. Tactical emergency casualty care and behavioral health, okay? As it relates to active violence response, I have no cool videos in this presentation. The next one I'm doing, I got some great videos. But we're keeping it real and we're talking fast. TECC, let me take one step back. The overall mental health problem in the country is, I think, our biggest problem. Police, fire, and EMS. The severe mental health crisis that's out there, we're not managing. Nobody's managing. It's a cluster. We're putting Band-Aid after Band-Aid. And these active shooter events, these high threat incidents, are going to keep happening until we solve that problem. And it's a huge, huge lift. But don't kid yourself, this stuff is not going away. So two fundamental critical components that I'm here to talk about relate to medical. It relates to tactical emergency casualty care, and it relates to behavioral health issues. How do we maximize survival in these active violence, high threat events, right? We have to understand the situation that we're going into. We have to make dynamic risk-benefit assessments, and we have to make tough decisions. But we have to think about these things well before they happen, right? We have to look at our incident commanders, expect more from our incident commanders, that they start thinking about this. What are they going to do if our first officer is shot going in through that front door? What are they going to do if they come across an explosive device right at the entrance to the school? Are we going to step back and not operate in that environment? Absolutely not. We can't. And for the bomb techs in the room, I know they're going, oh, God, oh, you didn't just say that. I did. What is our responsibility, right? To prevent further injury, to tend to the injured. How do we do that? We have to operationalize that. And what we talked about earlier, we had a pre-conference here on TECC and warm zone care, okay? Not just RTF, warm zone care. Okay, there's multiple forms of warm zone care to treat the injured. All right? But what it takes is not, we can't wait for us to get there and figure things out and get in there. We have to build a system, a community, right? A systems approach to this, where we're looking at first care providers, first responders that are already on the scene, pre-hospital medical care, us getting there and operating the most efficient and the most effective way. Because you know what? We're showing up regardless, and we're doing a shitty job of it when we get there. We have to maximize our effectiveness and our efficiency. Am I allowed to say shit? Is that all right? No, I can't, sorry. And a big component that we just talked about here are the emergency departments, right? We can't forget about them. The incident that we respond to quickly transitions to 1 hospital, 2 hospitals, 3 hospitals, or the little emergent 24-hour emergency place that's right around the corner, as was discussed previously. We have to know that our incident is quickly transitioning to those locations and send the appropriate resources to help them out. And then on the back end, with the real smart big brains, the trauma centers, and how do we repair this? So how do we do this? We bring tactical emergency casualty care, right, to all these different aspects. Tactical emergency casualty care is a framework. It utilizes the information that we received from the wars, from our soldiers being injured, how we maximize their survival. And we apply it to civilian use, okay? Every soldier that deploys is fairly healthy and between the ages of 18 and 40, right? That's not our population. So TECC takes into account those things. It was developed in 2012. It's a 501c3. It's a grassroots effort. It's open to anybody. Our next meeting, I forget the actual date, I think it's in October in Portland. And there's information on the website for it. We want to apply TECC as rapidly as possible relative to the threat. And so if you're in a bad situation, if your situation changes to a hot zone, you do the minimal amount of interventions to help save that life versus a warm zone where you can do a little bit more versus a cold zone where you have a lot more freedom to do things. But it's all laid out in the guidelines. There are certain things that we have to do when we build a program, right, to respond to these high-threat active shooter events, right? If I give you personal protective equipment, is that enough to say, hey, we have a program, we're good? No, right? We need a multitude of things. We need policies. We need training. We need coordination, integration, a whole variety of different things. And one component that we're forgetting about is at the back end for our people, right? Do we have a behavioral health system for our folks that are responding to this event? We know there are going to be challenges for these folks. So we have to institute some sort of system. And this is a huge thing that I've learned recently, the value of other people's experience, right? When we talk about resiliency centers and assistance centers, Vegas, you know who Vegas called right away when they needed to set up that system? They called Orlando. And Orlando was out within 24 hours helping them set up the appropriate system. And you know who El Paso called when they just had their event? They called Orlando and Vegas, and they were out there, okay? Which is a great resource, right? If we have these incidents, let's call the most recent jurisdiction that had this incident. Let's get their help. Let's get their guidance. Short of that, though, we know that these are issues. Let's build a program to help support it. This is a critical component, okay? Now, let me give you some perspective. Dr. Rich Kamen was a medical director for the state of Connecticut and responded to Sandy Hook. He was the one who went into that closet and saw what he saw, okay? He'll tell you he's not an expert in behavioral health, but he's been there and experienced what we're talking about here. Acute stress. When we run these incidents, okay, we are going to experience things. And that's normal. It's normal. I responded to the Pentagon on 9/11, okay? My primary memory when I think back is an ankle. I don't know why. Well, I know why, because I saw an ankle. Is that normal? No. And did I have these acute stressors for an extended period of time afterwards? I absolutely did, right? But I also knew and was cognizant of what I was experiencing and what I was feeling. And I was keeping touch on of myself. And we had a program in place. And I had opportunities to go out and get some help and to talk to people. But as time went on, these signs and symptoms, they tend to go away, right? It's normal to feel some of this stuff, to experience some of this stuff. It's when they don't go away that we have to be concerned. We have to set systems in place to help support these acute stressors as well as PTSD. And let me just emphasize, it can't be a one-size-fits-all solution, okay? We can't all sit around in a circle and tell our story and make everybody sit there and listen to it. It doesn't work for everybody. It may work for some. It doesn't work for everybody. We have to have options available for our folks. And there's departments that are out there, there are resources that are out there that we can and should be tapping into. And what we have offered, Dr. Kamen and myself, is that if you can't find those resources, feel free to reach out to us, and we'll help. So, two things. I've heard multiple times back home in training and at conferences that say, you've been on the job for 20, 30 years, you're going to get PTSD. Absolutely false. You have to create resiliency in yourself, right? But it is not a given that you are going to get PTSD. Certainly you're going to see some messed up stuff, right? And you're going to experience some acute stressors. But that is why we have these systems in place, so we don't get to that point. The last thing is we have to take care of one another, right? It's brothers looking out for brothers. If you see somebody that's not acting right, something's different, something's off, ask them. Hey, what's up, man? You doing all right? That's how we take care of our own. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, John. Thank you for stepping in at the last moment there. So our next speaker is going to talk to us about the recovery phase a bit more, specifically dealing with victims, reunification, and some of that aspect of it that we are probably least adept in handling. Dr. Catherine Floyd has recently served as the Mass Violence and Terrorism Visiting Fellow at the U.S. Department of Justice, the Office of Victims of Crime. Having studied mass violence for over 15 years, Dr. Floyd focuses on helping emergency managers prepare for and respond to victims of mass violence and terrorism. She works very closely with a number of federal partners, including Homeland Security, FEMA, Department of Education, Health and Human Services, and she is also serving with us on the NFPA 3000 committee. So please do welcome Dr. Catherine Floyd.
You can always count on Lori to make you sound super cool, especially for your mother. So you can call me Kay, like an old woman. That's absolutely fine. We can roll with that. You can thank my grandmother for that one. As she mentioned, I am serving as the Mass Violence and Terrorism Visiting Fellow through the end of this September, and then I'm going to return to my university home at William & Mary to continue this work on planning, response, and recovery. So I went ahead and gave you my personal email address in addition to the work one. Please do reach out. I'll make sure you're fully connected with OVC, DOJ, and I'm here to help. So this is really about me helping share information, some great resources to help you prepare for and respond to victims of mass violence and terrorism. This is about getting ready for recovery, as you heard emphasized at a number of points today, which absolutely includes fire, the emergency planners, the other first responders, and even those in the wings waiting to help, whether they make it to the scene or not. And of course, casualties, victims. A lot of people don't know that OVC exists until after a shooting or a terrorist attack occurs. Part of my job is to change that. So let's start with one of our initial programs that's being applied in Vegas, Orlando, and basically all the ones you can think about. The Anti-Terrorism and Emergency Assistance Program. This is primarily available after an incident, but also elements come into play now that could be helping y'all out. There's about $50 million that sits in AEAP annually, and if that gets drawn to zero because massive events happen, we have secret ways of asking for more. It's not secret, it's law, but roll with it. This is supplemental money. This is extra dollars that can't exist through other means, or we know from the second that attack has happened that we have blown through every penny at the county level, at the state level, at the private insurance level. So a few ways that AEAP can help you. First is with training and technical assistance. These are our consultants. These people can be utilized in advance of an incident to help you think through, all right, for my fire department, how are we getting ready for the victim's piece of response and recovery? So we can come out and we can do workshops, presentations. We can read your plans, whether you're like, I have one sentence, or you're like, here's my 300-page document. 100%, we are here to help you guys totally for free. TTA, training and technical assistance, can come into play immediately after an event to help with the Family Assistance Center and other tasks that maybe you didn't think were going to land in your lap, and then because of the situation, it's there on your desk. Our consultants, it's not a fancy schmancy hoity-toity sort of thing. These are the individuals like those here before you that have lived and breathed this on the ground in Sandy Hook, in Parkland, in Vegas. And they can come out after an incident to help you ID resources, assess needs, coordinate victim services, draft the grants you're going to be applying for from our office and others. And we move into these next grants following an incident. We say by invitation because we talk with you and we work with you on this application. It's not some random one you stumble upon. It's like, no, we just had a massive shooting. So a couple of things that this covers, I gave you the phases there, but again, based on the incident, we could look at emergency food and clothing, crisis counseling, compensation for medical and mental health costs, lost wages, funeral expenses, and there is some limited victim service-related law enforcement and overtime expenses as well. For death notifications or other pieces I could go into. I included a link to a video that you can watch later, but let's move to some pieces that you guys can be using sort of right now, but let's say you don't have time to look at these right now and something happens in your town. You can pull these off the internet on a moment's notice and just roll with them and go. So outside the door, I left a whole stack of these flyers. If you didn't get one, come see me after or grab one on your way out. This is our mass violence toolkit. And there's an email address at the bottom of that, and a real person answers it, not some, bot that's like, thank you for your message. If you want to go ahead and address it to a woman named Diane, you could be like, hey, Diane, I talked to Kay at this conference. So I'd like to briefly set the tone with this. You all are awesome. First responders, fire, you spend very, very important time and resources training to take the fight to the threat, to neutralize that shooter or terrorist, to stop the bleed, to save lives. When this acute phase of a shooter or other tragedy is over, you know we have to prepare for what's next. We don't have the luxury of not doing that anymore. And recovery, the measure of how resilient your community, your department is, and the legacy truly of the incident, that's going to last days, months, years, heck, we know it, decades. And it involves a whole lot of partners, hopefully coordinating in advance and not meeting each other for the first time on the scene. So I'm here to talk recovery because it's the biggest, longest, hardest piece of the equation. You owe it to your men and women, you owe it to your towns, your victims, you owe it to yourself. The The Mass Violence Toolkit is a free online resource that's going to do just this. It's going to help you get ready to prepare for and recover from a mass violence incident with that focus on victims. This is designed to complement, not replace any existing plans you might have, like the awesome training done by FEMA, DHS, Alert. Guys, this goes hand in hand with all of that. The toolkit was developed by the people in the field, those who have lived and breathed Virginia Tech, 9/11, and so many more. So we tried in formulating this to detail the cumulative knowledge of lessons learned, best practices, to build a framework for you all to plan and respond. So in developing this, we addressed the obstacles that had been faced elsewhere to hopefully prevent you or help you overcome similar things. Best practices, so you can go ahead and pull from those. We've identified elements that are helpful and also some that were not, and please don't repeat that, because the knee-jerk reaction is to go to the most recent incident or a few back and say, hey, what did you guys do? They may have done things that in that moment they believed were the right call, and I don't fault them for that for a second. But what if it really wasn't the right call? What if that could have been done better? So we do go through things like, hey, we actually recommend you do something slightly differently here. So that leads us to the toolkit. I refer to the Mass Violence Toolkit as the 9,000 things that are going to hit you in the face, and we're going to help you get ready for that in advance. Absolutely anyone can use this to enhance or make your plan. It has checklists, a compendium of resources, samples, and these will all help you go into the phases, partnerships, response, recovery, without missing key pieces of the equation, pieces that we have learned already, and you don't need to reinvent the wheel on that. When you go to our website to download and look at these, start with the checklists, especially the activities at a glance. You can download these, you can skip the parts that don't apply to you, and you can make these your own. These were created using money from the Crime Victims Fund, so criminals basically, to help you get ahead of the curve. Use these, absolutely, cut, paste, do your thing. So I'm going to go through the quick list, and elements of all of it, things I'm talking about today are embedded in NFPA 3000. Some discreetly, some say, see Mass Violence Toolkit in the annex. So it's very complementary to everything discussed here. First thing I'll highlight is meeting victims' needs. Victims, parents, random people, they're coming, and you know they're coming. They're coming to the hospitals, they're going to the incident site, even though you're going to say, please don't go to that school. Oh, they're coming. They're going through the woods to get to that school. And they're also going to hopefully go where you designate and tell them to head. So you need to immediately identify that location where people are coming. What are their needs right now, right this second? Food, shelter, warmth, AC, childcare. And as they start arriving to your designated location or elsewhere, you need to be prepared for what they're really going to want, which gets to my second sub-bullet point there, information. They're not going to want a cookie immediately after an incident. They're not going to want a therapist, although you could have both of those available. That's absolutely fine. They're going to want information. And it needs to be timely. If you can, it needs to offer answers to the myriad of questions they're going to have, or at least answer as best you can. And you can be ready with designated trained people at this point to offer support and services, again, as people first start arriving. You can immediately plan to deploy victim advocate teams or people whose jobs it is, their expertise, what they have trained and gone to school for, to deal with all of the people that are going to be showing up from your scene. The other piece are liaisons, advocates, and navigators. These are decently similar terms, but different jurisdictions prefer different terms. On our toolkit, you can go through and kind of see different descriptions for these. Boston used these, the Aurora Theater shooting, 9/11. It would be good if more places use this system, but this is becoming a bit of the norm. We've learned that the families of the deceased and often even the survivors are completely overwhelmed. Overwhelmed with what to do next, with the number of people who are contacting them with legitimate help and information, and also those who are not so legitimate, guys. You know that odd things start coming out of the woodwork after one of these instances. So you can have a system in place to assign a licensed, reputable, recognized, trained, whatever person to each family of the deceased. But also, if you have the bandwidth, those who survived, the people that are going to need help going through all of this, coordinating, receiving victim services, the mound of paperwork, and streamlining media requests, because my goodness, guys, you have seen, and this is not a criticism of the media, but the media demand after one of these shootings or other incident. So the neat thing about having a plan in place, whether it's a liaison, advocate, or navigator system, is for each family, all the information goes through one point person. The public information officer, second, I guess that's third, and media management. Additionally, it's important to keep media in the loop so they can report accurate information. Okay, where are we sending people once the shooting stopped? Centralized telephone number. Who do we call to get more information? What's the recognized website? Where should we send donations? The types of donations that are needed. And this will all roll into your communications protocol. Communications protocol is covered in NFPA 3000 as well. The PIO often comes from the police department, but it doesn't have to. That can vary. It might well come from fire. We've learned that the PIO needs to brief the media about every 20, 30 minutes. In Sutherland Springs, they set an egg timer just to go back every few minutes. Even if the brief is to say, we have no new information, we'll be back in 20 minutes. When you talk about media management, we have a kind of good lesson learned from Orlando. Think about when multiple jurisdictions respond, how many social media channels are represented with all the fire, all the police, the schools, the county. I mean, it just keeps going. So Orlando was able to streamline pretty quickly that there was one official channel and everyone else was retweeting or reposting from that. So when you go through your plans, how do you factor into a larger media plan? Because you're also going to need to dispel rumors quite quickly. Are there multiple shooters? How many places in Las Vegas? I mean, we heard that from the video. So how do we get accurate information out massively quickly on social media, and how do we stop some of the rumors? Pick one channel. When it comes to media management, be aware of what state or county laws you have to keep media from infringing on your crime scene and then staging areas. You might need your governor to declare a state of emergency, which means helicopters, drones that aren't part of the emergency response cannot go over the area that was just impacted or ambushed. Public spaces like a public university can become private. One university, well-meaning, said they didn't need the governor's help. I'm not entirely sure that was legal, but that's okay. And media just descended on that campus. Sutherland Springs, they shut down that airspace real fast, so you don't have some of the photos and images that you have from elsewhere. Another related challenge in this media management side is to determine how and what type of information is provided to victims and families versus the community at large. Best practices, and I wish I could make a banner of this. Best practices is to give information to the victims and the families first. They get it first. If you're releasing information 6 hours after the incident, try and tell the families gathered first, even if they know it first by 30 seconds. If your media person walks into room A, tells the families, walks out of room A, right next door to room B, and tells the media, or goes on television, or whatever that is, guys, victims' families get information first. If you're releasing your report, your AAR, 6 months later, brief the families and survivors first, even by 30 seconds. So plan how you're going to be distributing information. Compensation, victims' needs will soon transition into support and referrals for various services. You want to be aware of what your state offers for crime victim compensation and who else might be able to offer money. Know who your VOCA officers are, because after you all have lived through this, you might be the recipient of some of this aid and assistance. Anyone offering tangible assistance dollars should meet as part of your planning strategy, and hopefully in advance, but if not, during the tragedy about once a day or so. And here's a real reason why. You don't want to kick victims or yourselves out of compensation because, and I'm being hypothetical here, but someone in the mayor's office stands up and goes on TV and says, "We are going to pay for funerals." Cool, well-intentioned, thank you. But Mr. Mayor's office, did you know that the state can pay for funerals? And if the state doesn't have enough money, that's where some of our AEAP assistance could potentially come into play. Wouldn't you like the mayor's money to go for something that we can't pay for? Like overtime for firefighters? Repairing the walls of the school? So who has the dollars? Get them together, figure out who can pay for what. Taking volunteers first, part of your emergency operations or recovery plan should include knowing your volunteer partners ahead of time and what role they can fill. This might be Red Cross, this might be voluntary organizations active in disaster, or a local organization. But think through who needs to be in that first place you send everyone, notification center, and then the family assistance center, and have those people pre-identified to help with serving food so that you all don't end up doing it, getting information to families and victims, organizing childcare, providing grief counseling, and more. For counseling and mental health services, and this has been a hard lesson learned, so this is another one of my, if I could make a banner out of it, I would. The volunteers providing counseling, mental health, trauma services, they need to have previously worked with homicide survivors. You cannot take a family or divorce therapist and drop them into this. They'll hang around for a while, they'll try their best. They, like if I had to do this, are gonna leave and probably need help themselves. After the March 2018 shooting at the Pathway Home in California, there was a lack of local therapists that could handle this kind of tragedy, which is not their fault. Not everyone wants to go to school to learn how to deal with mass murder. But this gap is true elsewhere. It might be true in your towns and counties. You might need to get extra training and begin that process for your existing therapists if you don't have a major city with these resources nearby. So this is all to say, know who you're going to need to supplement, get them ready, have a way to call them up as something happens. And by the way, have a plan in place to deal with spontaneous volunteers who are going to show up and offer help and services, and you don't know them. That doesn't say they aren't great. Have a plan in place to go through, figure out who they are, pair them with someone, work. Or have a plan in place if you're like, this is not legitimate, to be like, oh, thank you so much. We don't need you right now. Like if someone showed up with a therapy cheetah. I mean, I don't think that's ever happened. I don't think you can like walk around like it looks like a dog, but it's not. But at these places, some odd stuff shows up. So have a plan in place where a self-proclaimed expert brings their therapy cheetah. Right, let's move along. Money. Donations tend to take two forms, non-monetary and monetary. Short term, people are going to send what they think you need, and you may have some very well-intended and often very welcome surprises. Some stuff is going to cause a huge headache, if not worse. Las Vegas had cases of bottled water, a restaurant donated food, great. On the other hand, when I was talking to some people from Sutherland Springs, and maybe you'll get a giggle out of this as well, again, I'm sure the person who put this in a box and sent it to them was very well-intentioned, but they sent a leotard for the first responders. I think some of you would look really good in a leotard, but I don't know if that's going to help you other than maybe a really good laugh in aiding with recovery and the like. Your partner organization, like a VOAD member, tends to have expertise in donation management, and they can think through refrigeration for food. You already heard the example from Sandy Hook. Sandy Hook needed 2 warehouses for over a year to store all the things that were donated. So what's the plan there? Sandy Hook was also the recipient of ponies, horses. Someone called up and said, I think that the children need ponies to aid and assist them. And everyone was like, did I hear you right? And then sent ponies, not people to look after the ponies or feed the ponies or care for the ponies. So that ended up in the laps of some of the emergency responders. So who is going to handle the ponies? Now for the money. Very quickly following the end of the incident, you're likely going to need a plan, your county, whatever, to collect monetary donations. Dealing with money is difficult, but there are national models and past examples to assist. The One Fund after the Boston Marathon bombing, we have that on our website, and other examples as well. But do not take the money yourselves. If you see, if Mandalay Bay was like, we're going to take the money ourselves, that would have been a terrible idea. They did not do that. Where possible, you want to identify an organization that's distinct from your own organization to assist with accepting these donations, because who gets what can get nasty pretty quickly. And we want this to be about healing and recovering, and let's use some of the national models. We also recommend that any call for monetary donations, whether through a specific fund or an individual account like a GoFundMe, guys, you need it to be as generic as humanly possible. Unmet victim and community needs, and then stop using more words. Because you don't want to go onto the news and make statements about where the money will and will not go toward, because then you're stuck. You are locked into that. And there might be unmet victim needs a month from the incident, a year from the incident, and you don't want to be so specific that you aren't able to use these funds to pay for the memorial and other considerations. And anticipate that there will be memorials and anniversaries. For memorials, so that, again, maybe this isn't the role of fire, maybe it's someone else, you need to figure out who gets to decide which flowers, cards, crosses, I'm thinking of Sutherland Springs there, get to be archived. Know your town archivist or librarian, because that's a perfect task to give them from your emergency plan. Planning is going to give your operational response operations that additional integrity, and it's going to strengthen your entire community's ability to recover. We talk a little bit about transitions. I can go into these in the Q&A, but these are the rough phases. The second something happens, you got to send people somewhere. Send the victims, send the families. Go to this designated location. We are no longer calling that the reunification center. These weapons, these incidences, not everyone's getting reunified. I would love to be able to still call it the reunification center. Reunification is a critically important activity that occurs at whatever the designated location is. 100% you have to plan for that, but I recommend, and others do as well, that you start calling it a notification center or information center. Not everyone's getting reunified. That will stay open probably 24 hours or so. Then you'll transition to a family or community assistance center. If it needs to go on longer, you might need to set up a resiliency center like Las Vegas, and then think through that hospitality center if there's going to be a trial or a memorial. Three big things that I want, if I could give you homework. Create your plan for the centers. If you do one thing, start with that notification center and the family assistance center plans so you can think through all of the little pieces. Here's an example. One university had a pretty darn good location in mind for their family assistance center. But what they didn't think through is that the distance between the parking lot and the center was a very long stretch that people had to walk. Every media camera set up there. And every family trying to go in to get help had to run the media gauntlet. So what security can you provide for that particular location, especially if, heaven forbid, this hasn't happened in the United States, that were to become a secondary target? So figure out the plan for the centers. When you're going through your lists of, okay, we're going to exercise response. We're going to exercise something happening, as you guys talked about. Go ahead and figure out who your local, often county or FBI field office, that victim witness specialist, add them to your emergency plans from the beginning, maybe VOCA. You might say, we are not dealing with recovery in this exercise. I don't care, just throw them in, because they're showing up with tools and dollars and stuff you guys might not even know exists that will help your people as well as those that you're treating and helping. You're doing any sort of exercise, go ahead and call them up or call me up. We'll help you guys out. And exercise recovery. Broward County recently did a pretty big full-scale exercise of family assistance center, and they've been very generous about helping and sharing that with others. So I can connect you with them, or actually, Lori, you could probably connect them with them too. Yeah. The Vicarious Trauma Toolkit is one of our other pieces, and I have some postcards I can hand out about this as well. This was developed to help those whose job it is to deal with this trauma. Because responders, the victim service providers, you all, we're going to be hurting as well. You can't go through this and not hurt. I've had the heartbreaking privilege to hear from the first cops to enter Sandy Hook, the first people to enter the Pulse nightclub, to have a firefighter from Las Vegas in the hallway at a conference break down crying with me. And I gave him a huge hug, and I'll hug each and every one of you. But as John Delaney emphasized, it would probably be better for you to have a plan in place to take care of your own before you're crying with me in a hallway. You can all have hugs, that's still allowed, but I'm not a professional. With this toolkit, we can help you take care of your own by assessing your agency's current capacity as a vicarious trauma-informed organization. We can help you come up with your plan, because after you go through something like this, no matter how trained you are, we know, John mentioned this, it's not okay that we don't have a plan in place to help our own anymore. When we don't have a plan in place, some will understandably struggle immediately after. That is completely normal. Some will continue to struggle later on. And we know the statistics. We know that people turn to alcohol and other unhealthy coping devices. We know the domestic abuse rates. We know the suicide rates. This is known. When no one is left in that department after 10 years because they painfully drifted away, we have a problem. And by the way, I'm not naming names, but that is following an active shooter. And you might be fine today, but maybe not tomorrow, maybe not in 10 years. I was chatting with a first responder recently who said early in his career he had a really horrible fire, and they had to take out the body of a 6-year-old. And he was good. He was good for over a decade, until his little boy, years later, turned 6. And he needed to get help and assistance because every time he looked at his son, the sight, the smell, the memory was all he could see. So let's get you ready now. We're still hearing about Oklahoma City. The Newtown police chief actually instituted a very good model, if you want a positive example to follow, about normalizing mental health services in whatever form that individual needed moving forward, and really normalizing that. For both of these things, we offer free custom training. We will help you for free, whether you've got a sentence to start with or an existing plan. Take our money. Take all of our money. We will come and we will help you in whatever form is best for you. Some other federal tools I want to highlight for you. First is the FBI's We Regret to Inform You. You may or may not be aware that there's a death notification protocol of best practices. The reason I'm hitting this hard right now is even if you aren't directly involved in death notifications, if you're sitting around the team with those who are, you need to ask them what their plan is. Be that responsible individual. Because we don't want to have a governor addressing a room full of parents, and the way they learn that their child is passed is by telling them no one else is coming out. Imagine if you were gathered to hear about your children, and I'm the governor, and I say no one else is coming out. Meant well, didn't want to keep information from the families, well intended, not best practices. In a very recent incident, the family is waiting to hear about their loved ones. Were lined up in a hallway, waiting to go into your guidance counselor style, and they were called one by one into the room. And again, we would recommend that, in fact, the process be done a little bit different. So the FBI will talk you through that. Let me just go back for a second. No, I can't hit back. Anyway, go click on that. It doesn't take very long at all. You could take in like an afternoon or something, maybe even an hour if you were going quite quickly, and know the best processes here. Other federal tools I've listed for you that might be of use, but I can connect you with these various resources. You've heard about NFPA. Almost everything I discussed today you're going to find in Chapter 20, but you'll find elements in some other pieces. All of my slides are available for your use. Lori, whoever can share them, you can have them. They belong to you. Thank you, federal grant. So thank you very much, and of course I can answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Now, given the time, I know we could have continued this. There's so many resources, so many points of information that we could have shared with you. Unfortunately, the time constraints, we have another webinar starting in here in 20 minutes, so we do not have time for live questions. I'm sorry. I am going to ask our panelists to hang around right outside or right up here in this area. So if you do want to come and talk with them, please do that. Please help me again to thank our panelists, and thank you so much for joining us today on the webcast.